research, we discovered that she was related to her mother's lawyer. Good afternoon, friends. Today we're going to be talking about something quite unusual. I bet you've never seen a video on this topic. We're going to be talking about non-paternal events. But before we do, please subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, like the video, and comment on the video for the sake of the algorithm. Now let's get started. First of all, what's a non-paternal event? A non-paternal event is classically when a couple are married or monogamous in some way, or apparently monogamous, and the wife gets pregnant by someone other than the husband. But the husband doesn't know this and raises the child as if he's her or his father. Before we get started in this discussion, we have to establish some definitions of acronyms. An EPC is an extra pair copulation. That is a woman cheating on her husband with somebody else during the time of the relationship. An EPP is an extra pair paternity, which means the woman cheated on her husband, got pregnant, had a child, and the husband didn't know that the child was not his. So now that we've established those definitions, is it true that EPPs happen in 10 to 20% of cases? No, absolutely not true in the West. In the West, EPPs currently occur in about 1% of the Western population. So about 1% of people are born to somebody other than their father and don't know it. Now, historically, this fluctuated a little bit. So in the West, in urban areas among people of low socioeconomic status, it would rise to its highest. So historically, it's fluctuated in the West between like 0.4% EPPs to up to almost 6% EPPs at the height. And those are among the poor in urban communities, which makes sense because those communities are more dynamic, more transient, and so on. Now, what about EPCs, the extra pair copulation, the cheating? How frequently does that happen among Western families? It's thought to occur and have an incidence of between 5 to 27% of couples in the West, and is thought to have been lower historically before the advent of contraception. However, these figures are a little bit different outside the West, and that wasn't realized until very recently. So for example, in Namibia, among a tribe called the Himba, EPCs are quite high, almost 50%. And almost 70% of all families have at least one EPP, one child that wasn't born of the father, that the father's raising. A side note here, although I've been saying usually the father doesn't know the paternity of the child, this isn't completely sure. What we're talking about is the father really raising the child as his own. He may actually sense that the child isn't his. This does happen in real life. For example, among the Himba, it seems that they do know that the child isn't theirs, but raise it anyway. And I know of, for example, let me tell you from my own personal family story. My mother's brother is not her real brother. He's a half-brother. And the reason why is because, unfortunately, my grandmother cheated on my grandfather. But my grandfather knew it. They were having some kind of conflict. She cheated on him. But because he's such a generous and kind man, he raised the boy as his own. Unfortunately, because the boy realized that he wasn't my grandpa's and because he didn't have great support from his mother, they eventually divorced. And he didn't have great support from his mother. He ended up dying in his 30s from a drug overdose. But this has happened in my own family. So I knew about that story from my childhood. We all knew that he wasn't my full uncle. But there are even more surprising outcomes. So for example, because I'm really into genealogic research, I actually manage my mother's family's Facebook group where I've connected our family across the United States. They were originally based in Alabama, but after the Civil War, they moved from Alabama. Some of them moved from Alabama to Louisiana, some moved to Texas, and some moved to New Mexico, and then my mother's in Colorado and I was born in Colorado. So we're across several states. I've been able to connect some of our family members who haven't talked to each other and their lines of descent for, almost 100 years. So it's been very fun. And in doing so, I've met some family members that I didn't know before and that I've been able to help with their own genealogic research. While helping my relatives with their genealogic analysis, I came across some interesting incidents. Like, for example, one really comes to mind, and I want to tell you guys about it to show you how real this is and how surprising it is now with the advent of genetic genealogy. So I have a relative who is my grandma's half-sister, we thought. Okay, so how it happened is my grandma has a father, my great-grandpa, who was a pilot, an Air Force pilot or something like that. He got divorced eventually from his wife and remarried later on to another woman and had only one daughter from that woman. So my grandma was from the first wife and the second one was from the second wife, we thought. But when she did her genealogic analysis, we found that me and her had absolutely no large chunks of genetic information in common. So it turned out that, doing a little bit more research, we discovered that she was related to her mother's lawyer. So it turned out that her mother's lawyer, and this is, I believe, this is in the South, I don't know where it is exactly, but her mother's lawyer must have slept with her mother without my great-grandpa's knowledge, and the mother passed it off as my great-grandpa's daughter. And it seems that my great-grandpa never knew this, never knew that it wasn't his daughter. So the poor lady, when she discovered this in her 60s, she had a somewhat of an identity crisis because she spent her whole life thinking that her father was her father, and he wasn't. He was not related to her at all. And her mother, more importantly, she told me, her mother lied to her. And that's what really bothered her because her mother was already dead. So she couldn't ask her mother about the situation. She couldn't get any kind of explanation. And she's also apprehensive about contacting the descendants of the lawyer because the family of the lawyer don't know that he slept with somebody else and had another child. And this isn't the only story of a similar thing happening. This happens in a lot of families. People discover that their fathers aren't their fathers. Let me give you another example. So my mother belongs to a family called the Hamilton family. The Hamilton family is from lowland Scotland. There's a place called Hambleton. There's a few Hamiltons. But the main Hamiltons are thought to be of Norman descent. What's Norman descent? Norman descent means they come from the Vikings who conquered France, who then went from France speaking French into England and conquered England at the Battle of Hastings. The Hamiltons are thought to be Normans and therefore belong to the I haplogroup. On my mother's side, do not belong to the I haplogroup. They're R1bs. R1bs signify the native populations of Britain. Like, for example, R1b is in the highest density in Wales. And for example, I is in the highest density in Scotland, where the Vikings were raiding. But I'm not an I. And in fact, neither was Alexander Hamilton. He's not from the original Hamilton family either. So I wonder whether there was a non-paternal event or whether we're from a completely different family in that line. Unfortunately, that Hamilton line was a little bit more difficult for me to follow. I have most of my family lined out, but that line ends in around the 1700s. Most of my ancestors came to America before 1700. Anyway, guys, I hope this was interesting for you. There are non-paternal events, although we're much more likely to catch them today, but they don't happen in 10 to 20% of cases. They happen in between 0.5% to 6% historically in the West, although cheating is at a much higher level, reaching up to 27% even today. Anyway, guys, thank you so much for bearing with me. I hope this was slightly interesting. I'll see you tomorrow.